Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is a class on how to study the Bible. And in 3 separate videos, I'm going to take you step by step, teaching you a process on how to do your own Bible study anytime that you would like. Now, here's what I sincerely believe. I sincerely believe that anyone can study any passage from any book in the Bible. And in these 3 videos, I'm going to show you exactly how to do a Bible study that you can then apply to any passage of any book in the Bible. You can do this. And here's what we want to do. As a result of going through these 3 videos, through this class, you will have a study method for understanding the Bible's teachings. You will be able to do this completely on your own, and you'll have a method, a system for knowing how to study any passage in any book in the Bible. Not only that, you won't have to depend on others for your scriptural nourishment. It's wonderful that we can go to church on weekends and on Wednesdays, Bible studies, small groups, Sunday school, all of that, and be fed there. But we can't depend only on that. At some point, we need to become self-feeders. And in this method, in these 3 videos, I'm going to teach you a method that's going to help you not to have to be dependent on others for your spiritual nourishment. You still need to go to church. You still need to go to small groups, Sunday school, all those things. You get additional nourishment there, but we can't be dependent on others for our nourishment. We need to become self-feeders. And finally, you'll be able to share what you learn with others. That's one of the beautiful things about doing a Bible study. You nourish yourself, you grow, but then you also get to teach others the wonderful things that you have learned. So let's get into this. I'm going to teach you this method step by step, and I'm going to use the book of James as an example. I'm just going to select a passage from the book of James to teach you the method, not so much to study that individual passage itself, but to teach you the method step by step. I'm going to teach you how to do this. Let's start. Step number 1. What you want to do is you want to read the entire book from start to finish. And this applies to any Bible study that you're doing in any passage of any book. You want to read the entire book from start to finish. Now with the book of James, that's not too difficult. It's not a very long book. You can read it from start to finish and it won't take you that very long. If you're dealing with another book that's a little bit longer, Romans, 1 Corinthians, Revelation, Isaiah, for example, then you may not be able to read the entire book from start to finish in one sitting. You may have to break it up over several blocks of time, and that's okay. But what you can do is at least read a few chapters to get an idea of the context of the passage that you're studying. So if you're reading a book that's short enough, then definitely take the time first to read the entire book from start to finish. If not, then at least read a few chapters before and a few chapters after the passage that you're studying in order to get a general idea of the context and how the message of that book is developing. That's step number 1. And so you want to read the entire book from start to finish, and then after that, here's where we want to go from here. As a result of that, of reading that book, the book from start to finish, what happens is that you develop a general overall understanding of the book's message. That's the whole purpose of it, that before you dive into the individual sections of the book, you want to have just a general idea of the overall book. So here's what's happening. The more you understand the whole, that is the entire book, the better you'll understand the individual parts when you go in and you do an individual a Bible study on an individual section or passage of that book. And the better you understand the individual parts, well, guess what? That means that you'll understand the whole even better. And it just becomes a cycle and a circle that the more you understand the whole, the more you understand the parts, and it just continues over and over again. This is why it's important to begin with a general understanding, an overview of the book's message as a whole. Here's what you're looking for in this step 1. Major themes and key concepts, important words that maybe appear several times. For example, the book of Philippians, joy is a theme and a word that appears several times in that book. That's what you're looking for, these key indicators. Repeated ideas. What do you learn about the author? Again, using Paul as an example, we learned that when he wrote a few of his epistles, he was in prison. What do you learn about the author? What do you learn about the recipients of these writings from the Old or New Testament? These are the general things that you want to keep in mind as you're reading the entire book. It'd be a great idea to have a little notebook off to the side and just jot down some ideas of what you think as you read the entire book, as you start looking for these different items as you read the entire book. Step number 2, you've read the entire book, you have a general idea of what the book is about. Now it's time to begin to get into individual sections or passages of the book. And that's step number 2. You're going to look at this book and then you're going to divide the book into passages. And the passages are the individual sections of that book where you're going to do a deep dive type of study. Now, for our purposes, what is a passage? A passage is simply this. A passage is a group of verses that teach a single main idea. That's a passage. It's a group of verses and they develop one big idea, one general idea within that passage or that group of verses. There's one significant main teaching or main idea that's developed in a passage. And so the way you know that you've started or stopped a passage is when you sense that the author is beginning to develop another idea, another big idea, then that's where you know that a passage has ended and another one has begun. Here's the book of James. Now, I don't intend for you to be able to read this. This is not legible at all. It's too small. But what I want to show you is how the book of James is divided into passages. Here we have James chapter 1, verses 2 through 12. That's a passage. Why? Because a single main idea is developed in these verses right here. Then James chapter 1 verses 19 through 27, that's another passage. Why? Because those verses, that group of verses right there, develop another single main big idea or big teaching. And then James chapter 2 from verses 1 through 12, that's another passage. Why? Because another big or main idea is developed in those groups, in that group of verses. So you don't want to study James chapter 1 all the way to James chapter 2 just in one sitting. You can't do that because you're really dealing with 3 different main ideas in those 3 passages. So what you want to do is you want to study first this passage here. Get as much as you can out of it. Doesn't really matter how long it takes you. You're not in any kind of race. You're into this to learn and to grow. So you want to camp out here in this passage for a while. Once you feel satisfied that you've learned quite a bit from there, then you'll jump over to the next passage. Then you'll jump over to the next passage and so forth and so on until you've completed the entire book, passage by passage. In our modern day contemporary versions, they've done a good job of helping us identify passages. And just like I have here, this is taken from the NIV, the New International Version. You'll notice this is copied straight from there. They have headings or titles at the beginning of each passage. And that helps us identify where the different passages start and where they end. You may not always agree with how the NIV has divided the passages, but most of the time they do an excellent job of dividing the book into passages. So if you're kind of stuck or you're not entirely sure if you've divided the book into passages correctly, then take your guide from the way that the NIV or whatever version of the Bible that you're using, how they've divided the book into passages, and use that as a basis for your passages in your study. So here's what I do in my personal Bible study. Again, I know this is a little bit small, but this is for the sake of teaching the method. So here I have James chapter 1, verses 19 through 27. That was that second passage that we saw in the previous screen. And what I do in my Bible, I use an electronic Bible, a computer-based Bible program, but you can do this on your computer or in a hard copy of a Bible, is I use these green arrows that you see right here, one at the beginning of the passage and then one at the end of the passage. And so when I glance at my Bible, be it electronically or in a hard copy, when I see these green arrows, that indicates to me, oh, that's one passage right there. That's a unit of study. And what happens is that sometimes I'll study a passage and then I'll go back to that same book sometime later and I'll see I've already done a study here and this is how I divided the passages. But this for me is just a visual indicator. It's kind of a start and a stop, right? It shows me visually, it demonstrates to me what are the limits of my passage? What are the limits that I've established for this particular study? You don't have to use green arrows, use whatever you need, but do something, whether it's in your Bible program or in your actual hard copy of the Bible, do something to indicate to yourself where are the different passages within this book? That's going to help you quite a bit so that you don't feel as if you have to take on this massive amount of verses to do your Bible study. No, divide it into passages and use some visual indicators for yourself to show you where those passages are. So those are the first two steps in doing a Bible study from any book, any passage, any book in the Bible that anyone can do. Step number one, read the entire book from start to finish. Step number two, divide the book into passages. And if you need to, then you can use the titles and the divisions that the Bible version that you're using, whatever they've decided, you can use that as a guide. Very simple steps. Step number one, step number two, read the entire book from start to finish, and then go in there and start dividing your book into passages. That's the first video. Stay tuned, keep watching. Video number 2 is up for steps 3 and 4.